Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Jason Boyd, along with my co-host Brian Vaughn, and welcome to another edition of the WSE Lounge. And please welcome our guest at this time, former AWA WCW commentator, former WCW president, the creator of WCW Monday Nitro, the architect of the nWo, former WWE Raw general manager. You've seen him on TNA. He is Eazy-E, Eric Bischoff. Eric, welcome to the WSE Lounge.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here.
You're very welcome. I want to tell you, Eric, first off, you are my favorite authority figure that's ever been in professional wrestling. I mean, from day one, when I seen you in WCW, what you did, with WCW was amazing, and you've always been such an inspiration to me, and I just wanted to tell you that.
Well, that's very kind of you, and it makes me feel good, so thank you very much.
You're very welcome. How did you get involved in wrestling?
Well, it's a long story, and I've covered it, many times, and I'm sure your listeners have probably heard it. But, it all started with it really was coincidence. I was a sales manager for a food processor in Minneapolis. A very close friend of mine, Sonny Ono, and I had an idea for a kids game that we wanted to manufacture and sell, and in an effort to find a way to sell that game, I eventually found my way to Vern Gagne's offices at the AWA in order to try to convince him to do a joint venture of sorts where I would promote and advertise my game on his television show, All-Star Wrestling on ESPN, and we'd split the profits. And that worked out okay. It wasn't a huge success, but we got out of it with our skin on. And just through that relationship and getting to know each other, I was offered a job in sales at the AWA, and that's really how it started. It was really nothing more than coincidence and great timing.
Wow.
Well, Eric, question that's on the minds of a lot of fans is that I've spoke to is WCW, of course, was probably, it was my favorite wrestling company growing up. And around 94, the aspect of the business was changing, and there were contracts granting creative control. I believe Hulk Hogan was the first. I think Nash and Hall had those contracts, and maybe Bret Hart, not sure. But how hard was it to work around the creative control contract with you and the powers that be?
Well, I think, unfortunately, you've probably been exposed to some really bad information and some urban legend and some false narrative over the years. And I've tried to clear that up, but I'll take some time to do it again with you guys since you asked the question. First of all, guaranteed contracts were around in WCW a long time before I got there. Everybody that worked at WCW prior to my getting there in 92 had a guaranteed contract. So the myth that Eric Bischoff created guaranteed contracts is exactly that. It is a myth. It is not true. When I was hired to WCW, I was hired under a guaranteed contract, and I was a third-string cleanup announcer. So, number one, I think we need to dispel the myth that Eric Bischoff created guaranteed contracts. Number two, in terms of creative control, there is only one person that I can remember, and I will admit that perhaps because it was 20 or 25 years ago in some respects, that there is a slight possibility that my recollection isn't 100% accurate, but I'm almost certain, probably 98% certain, that the only person who had real creative control, and I'm going to emphasize real, was Hulk Hogan. There were others who followed, probably Bill Goldberg, would be one, not in his initial contract, but in his subsequent agreement that was negotiated a year or two or three or whatever it was after he first arrived in WCW, where he may have had mutual approval with a tiebreaker, so to speak, or at least some meaningful consultation regarding his creative. But I think you guys are under the, like I said, the misinformation through no fault of your own, because this is an urban legend that's been spreading, for years and years and years by people who strive to get attention for themselves. But there's a myth out there that all these guys had creative control, and it's absolutely that. It is a myth, and hopefully someday that myth will evaporate under the white hot spotlight of the truth. And as far as Hulk Hogan's concerned, he never really exercised his creative control. So it was never difficult, despite what a lot of Hulk Hogan haters and Eric Bischoff haters and a lot of people that like to sound like they know more about what was going on in WCW than they ever did, or people that want to convince others that they had real insight of what could have been done to change the direction of WCW or save WCW. Those people are all fabricating things to make themselves sound smarter than they are, or closer to the actual truth than they were. Hulk Hogan was very easy to work with in many respects. In some respects, he was difficult. Don't get me wrong. He was moody. He would change his mind often. He was easily influenced sometimes by people that he trusted around him, and sometimes those people would pull him in different directions. And that was difficult. I'm not going to say it was always easy. But the only time that his creative control really became a factor was in the in the pay-per-view where, he and Sting were finally going to meet. And then that issue, or his creative control, became, an important part of the discussions, because he and I both had some, doubts about the decisions that we had made. And I don't really want to go into that again, because I've spoken about it so many times that it's hard for me to get excited about talking about it again. But it was a factor in one particular match between he and Sting. But beyond that, it was never a factor. So I hopefully this interview will dispel that false narrative once and for all.
When you created Nitro, did you think that it would be as successful as it was?
No, I certainly did not. I had hoped it would be, but there was no way. I didn't have a crystal ball. I wasn't sure how the audience was going to react. We knew when we went head-to-head with the WWE that the WWE had been around for decades. Vince McMahon's father started the WWW, or didn't start, had the WWF. And when Vince was a very, very young man, and Vince grew up in that business. Prior to that, I believe Vince's grandfather had the WWF. So the WWF and its evolution had been around in one of the most densely populated parts of the United States for decades and decades and decades before WCW was ever on anybody's radar screen. And when you have that much loyalty, like the WWE did when we went head-to-head with them, there's no way of knowing how the audience is going to react to that. And we knew we were up against that because we were a young, probably WCW may have only been 6 or 8 years old at that time, and certainly me being at the helm was a brand new experience. And not everybody in the audience really appreciated that or had any respect for that. So we knew we were standing at the bottom of a very big mountain that we had to climb, and we hoped that we would be able to climb that mountain and be competitive. But I would be lying to you and misleading you if I were to tell you that deep down in my heart or in my soul, I was confident that we were going to be successful. That would be untrue. I was hopeful, but shocked, quite frankly, pleasantly shocked, but shocked that we were able to make as much progress we did as we did as quickly as we did.
Well, I think y'all did a awesome job, to say the least.
Well, thank you.
In regards to that first Nitro, Eric, I remember it like it was yesterday. Mall of America, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Lex Luger comes walking out in the middle of the crowd. I believe he had been in a WWE pay-per-view the night before. How did you guys keep that covered up? I mean, that was amazing.
Yeah, it was. And, the element of surprise was one of the things that we knew we had to achieve in order for Nitro to have any chance of being successful. And that came from, quite honestly, we did a series of focus groups and research with a lot of fans who were fans of WWE, who were fans of WCW, who used to be fans of WWE or used to be fans of WCW, and fans who watched both companies. So we did an extensive amount of research to try to identify the characteristics of a show that the audience really liked across the board. And one of those characteristics was the element of surprise. Every time we did a focus group in our research and we asked people to identify, specific elements that they really enjoy, the element of surprise was always near the top of the list, if not the top of the list. So we knew that had to be a powerful component of our format. And when we started developing the Nitro format and preparing to launch Nitro, not long before that is when I started having discussions with Lex Luger, who in Sting set that up because Sting was a friend and he was someone who I had and still have a tremendous amount of respect for. Sting and Lex Luger were close friends and business partners at the time. So Sting encouraged me to have a conversation with Lex, and I did. And it was through the course of those conversations that we determined that, the best way to take advantage of Lex Luger and the fact that he was making this jump under the circumstances was to go to whatever extreme we had to go to keep it secret. And we did a lot of things, and I think, I don't recall this specifically because it's been a long time, guys, but, I didn't even want to fly Lex Luger in on a WCW ticket because that means that people within WCW would have had to make those travel arrangements. And if someone in WCW had to make his travel arrangements, then there was a good chance that that information would leak. So I had Lex buy his own plane ticket and offered to reimburse him for it, obviously. I had Lex make his own hotel room reservations and obviously reimburse him for it. And we went to that extreme because we knew that if we conducted business the way we normally did, the odds are what normally happens would happen, and the word would have gone out and would have ruined the surprise. So, we knew we needed a surprise. We knew we had an opportunity in Lex Luger to have a big surprise, but we knew we had to go to an extreme to keep it a surprise, and that's what we did.
Well, as a 10-year-old kid, I remember watching that, and that whole first Nitro was just, from bell to bell, just an amazing night. I remember it very, very well.
Well, I'm glad you do. I barely remember. No, I'm just kidding. I remember it very well. I do remember it kind of like it was yesterday too, because it was a very big moment, and it was a giant leap. And the fact that it was in Minneapolis, where I started my career, was kind of special to me. So there were a lot of, and I still have very fond memories of it, and I do remember it very well.
When you and Ric Flair basically had a knockdown, and I remember this like it's yesterday too. When you and Ric Flair basically had a knockdown drag out on Nitro, how personal was that on a professional level?
Well, I would say 50% of it was real and 50% of it was professional. The truth is that Rick and I had been friends for several years. Ric Flair was instrumental, if not critical, in my ability to bring Hulk Hogan to WCW. Had it not been for Ric Flair, there's a good chance that Hulk Hogan would have never come to WCW. And we, our families would, we would go down to, Disney MGM Studios to shoot our show, Worldwide Wrestling down there. And Ric Flair and his family and my family would, stay together at the hotel, and we would have dinners together and, spend time at the pool together. Our kids played together, grew up together in a respect, for a short period of time. So we were very, very close. But, as sometimes happens in business, things change, situations change, and Rick and I found ourselves on opposite ends of an opinion, and it got ugly, it got tense, it got legal, it got a little bitter, and we both had to draw a line in the sand, and we did, and we both believed we were right. But to Rick's credit, and hopefully, to mine, I guess, we were able to put that behind us. Once we got the issue resolved and it was time to conduct business, then we both agreed that the best thing for business was for us to embrace the reality that the public knew about. It was a very high profile. Everybody understood kind of what was going on and the contractual issues that were at stake. So we decided the best thing for the story was to embrace the reality. And once we shook hands, got the business issues behind us, then it was all professional. And I remember the night when I got back to my room after we had our match, and Ric Flair called me in my room. And I was, you guys got to remember, I'm not a wrestler. I've never been a wrestler. I've been in the ring thousands of times. I've been on camera thousands of times. I've done a lot of great things on camera. I've been blessed with a lot of great opportunities. But wrestling is not my forte. Physicality in the ring. I've never trained for that. So for me to get in the ring and perform in a match, as it were, with Ric Flair was as overwhelming for me at that time as it would be for one of you guys or for any fan watching in many respects. And when I got back to my room, I was about 8 feet off the ground. I still had adrenaline, but I was feeling so, I don't know what the word would be then. I guess probably grateful, partially grateful for the opportunity, partially grateful because it turned out really well, and probably mostly grateful that I didn't screw it up. And I remember getting to my room, and Ric Flair gave me a call, and and I don't remember what he said exactly, but it was words of encouragement, and he thanked me, and I thanked him, and it was just as much as he and I had been through a lot of personal issues that were kind of unfortunate and, to be quite honest, ugly. That phone call after that match washed it all away and just made me feel so good and so proud and grateful for the opportunity.
In the Steve Austin firing, I've heard a lot of stories about that. I would like to get your side of what happened between the two and how everything went down.
Well, again, this is a story I've probably told 1,000 times, and I would encourage your listeners to, if you go to Steve's podcast, Stone Cold Steve Austin podcast, I think it's on podcast 1. Steve and I spent about 3 hours a year or two ago, 4 hours on that podcast, talking about all things WCW and Eric Bischoff, Steve Austin related. And we both gave our own perspectives of what was going on and what the issues leading up to that firing. So again, I'm reluctant to spend a whole lot of time going into detail because we've done it so many times. But I was running a company that was, it was wounded. We were operating on about 3 out of 8 cylinders, and we were struggling. This was long before Nitro and long before any success, and we were just trying to keep the ship afloat because there were a lot of people in Turner Broadcasting that wanted WCW to go away. There were a lot of people that wanted to pull the plug on WCW after Bill Watts and the kind of debacle that occurred while he was in charge of WCW. So there was a lot of pressure on me. And there was a lot of, unhappy people at WCW at that time, and they had a right to be unhappy. There was a lot of frustration. And Steve had suffered some injuries. He was frustrated and had his own particular point of view at that time and issues that were, in conflict with some of ours or mine. And it was at one point during one of his injuries, he was on the shelf for a while, rehabbing, and I wanted to try to keep Steve alive on camera. And we were filming our show at Center Stage in downtown Atlanta, where we did our WCW Saturday night show. And Steve was not scheduled to appear on the show, but early in the afternoon, we decided that the best thing for us to do and to keep Steve's character alive, even though he couldn't wrestle, was to bring him down to Center Stage and do an interview with him so that we could keep him on camera, keep him alive, keeping him in the front of the viewer's mind. So I asked, and I don't remember if it was Tony Schiavone or Janie Engel, but one of them, I think it was Tony Schiavone, but don't hold me to it. I believe I asked Tony to give Steve a call to ask Steve to come down to Center Stage. And Tony came back to me, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact verbiage or words that he used. But essentially, Tony said he got on the phone, and Steve's wife at the time answered the phone. Tony explained to her that Tony wanted to speak to Steve, and Tony could hear in the background. He could hear Steve saying, "You tell them sons of I'm not coming. You tell them I'm not here." And of course, Tony came back and told me what happened. And I thought, well, that's kind of the last straw. I'm paying him. I'm trying to create an opportunity for him to stay alive in the show, and clearly he was frustrated with I don't know if it was with me or things in general, but when I heard that response, I decided it was probably best to part company. And I got back to my office the next day, and as required by contract, even though I've become infamous now for firing people by FedEx, which only happened one time. I think maybe twice, but by contract, I had to notify Steve in writing. In order for his termination to be effective and to be legal according to the contract, he had to be notified in writing, and it had to be delivered to his house, and there had to be proof of delivery of that notification. Now, I'm not saying that that's an excuse. It was I could have and should have, in retrospect, had the respect for Steve to call him and let him know what I was about to do, or ask him to come into the office so I could meet him face to face and tell him what I was going to do. But quite frankly, I didn't feel the need, given his response to me and my request to come to do TV. When I heard his response was tell them sons of, I'm not coming or I'm not here, I didn't really feel the need to go out of my way to be any more courteous than I had to be legally. And I feel badly for that. I'm not proud of that, but that was then, and I did what I did. And I guess if the situation was the same, I'd probably do it today. And if you hear Steve's side of the story, Steve, and I don't want to put words in Steve's mouth by any stretch. Steve and I are good friends, and I have tons and tons of respect for Steve. But even Steve will tell you that, he doesn't blame me for that situation, and he will also tell you it was the best thing that ever happened to him. And it is, because had Steve stayed in WCW, we might not have the Stone Cold Steve Austin character that that everybody has loved for so many years, and we still love and still enjoy watching on television to this day. So, there's a lot to be said for, all things happen for a good reason. As uncomfortable as it was for him and for me in subsequent years, being tagged as the guy that fired, a superstar in a FedEx, the truth is, it was a circumstance that just, happened, and everybody came out better for it.
I want to ask you, Eric. We ask all of our guests, Could you do like a quick promo for us, just saying this is Eric Bischoff and you're listening to the WSE Lounge?
Sure. In 3, 2, 1. Hi, this is Eric Bischoff, and you're listening to the WSE Lounge.
Okay. Thank you, sir. When did you decide on the nWo angle of Scott Hall and Kevin Nash coming in and Hulk Hogan being the third man?
It was a long evolutionary process, really. And again, there's so much false narrative out there. And, people will claim that I stole the idea from Japan and that I saw the idea over in Japan and I brought it here, which is totally untrue. What they have done, what unfortunately some people have done is taken bits and pieces of things that I've said in the past and condensed them and modified them to try to create a narrative that I basically stole the idea from somebody else. And that's not true. What happened was, over the course of 2 or 3 years, I had been doing a lot of business in Japan with New Japan Pro Wrestling. And I had been studying the Japanese psychology in professional wrestling and the Japanese way of conducting business, because in the United States at that time, the WWE was, I don't want to say they were floundering, but they were certainly not firing on all 8 cylinders. WCW was broken almost beyond repair, and my job was to try to fix WCW before they finally pulled the plug on it. And in studying what was working extremely well in Japan, because the Japanese audience believed the storylines. They allowed themselves to get immersed in the characters of the stories because they were so believable. And even the press in Japan treated professional wrestling and New Japan Pro Wrestling with a tremendous amount of respect. And oftentimes you would see headlines in the Tokyo newspaper on Sunday mornings, headlines on the sports page of the event that took place in the Tokyo Dome the night before. And I was fascinated by that and was fascinated and committed into trying to find a way to create that same sense of believability here in the United States, because I felt that's what was missing: credibility and believability. So in looking at how, business, it's like from a psychology point of view, business was being conducted in Japan, one of the things that I learned was that once a year, once every couple of years, they would do this, intercompany rivalry, or one company would try to take over another company. And it worked consistently very, very well, because in some cases there was an element of truth to it. So in seeing that psychology and how it was applied over the course of a couple of years, I was determined to try to figure out a way to do the same thing in the United States. Coincidentally, and I can't emphasize that enough, around that same time that I was beginning to kind of sort of shape an idea in my head, Scott Hall became available. Shortly after Scott Hall became available, Kevin Nash became available. And now I had the premise for my story, because if you remember, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash.
Okay.
No, I'm here. I'm listening to your phone ring. Scott Hall and Kevin Nash.
Sorry about that.
Scott Hall and Kevin Nash had previously worked in WCW, had left very frustrated and with a very bad taste in their mouth about WCW. And this was prior to me really getting control of anything. They both went to WWE, and they both became very big stars. Then they left WWE to come to WCW. Well, that set up the nWo storyline perfectly, because now I had the premise for my story. And that premise being 2 guys who didn't like the way they were treated in WCW, who went on to become big stars, were now coming back to WCW to get their revenge for not being treated properly. That was the premise of the nWo story. It's that simple. But because it was believable, because most of the audience knew that they both had been there at WCW before, most of the audience, obviously all of the audience knew that they had come to WCW, gone to WWE and become big stars. The audience believed the premise of our story. And it made it real. It made it believable. It gave the audience permission to believe that story. And once you give the audience permission to believe it, they just dive into it. And that's why it worked.
Tell you what, that's an interesting story, and I want to apologize to you for the phone ringing in the background, Mr. Bischoff.
Oh, no worries. It's your show, brother. It's your show, brother, not mine. I'm cool.
We have a caller for you to ask a question. 770, you're on the air.
Hello, Brian. Hello, Mr. Bischoff. I wanted to ask you, do you have any plans on being with another promotion like Global Force Wrestling or anything like that?
No, I don't. I'm not, really sure what's going on in Global Force. I know that they're doing, independent shows, and Jeff Jarrett is booking himself along with some of the people that work with him at Global. But I haven't talked to Jeff in 6 months or 8 months. I wish him well. I really hope that he's successful. But have had no conversations really about doing anything with Jeff. And there's really nobody else out there, that I would, consider working with on a full-time basis. I do enjoy, though, to be honest with you, I've been doing more and more, independent shows as of late. And I just did one last weekend in Albuquerque, and I really did it on 24 hours notice. They didn't advertise me. They didn't promote me. It was a surprise. And I showed up, and I just had a blast. I had so much fun doing it. And I'm going back on April 23rd in Albuquerque to do another one with them. And I'm also going to do a seminar. I'm going to meet with their talent during the day and the afternoon and work with them on their promos and try to help them with their characters and just give them whatever insight I could give them. And I'm going to go in the night before and do a Q&A for some of their fans. And by the way, I'm not charging anybody for anything. I'm doing it for fun, just for the fun of it. At least the Q&A and the clinic I'm doing just because I miss working with talent, and especially young talent that are eager to learn and are open-minded. But I just get the biggest kick out of doing that and seeing the joy, quite frankly, that these young guys and girls get out of going out there and performing. I was kind of taken aback in a positive way with the level of respect that I see in the tradition of respect that I see back in the locker room at some of these independent shows. It reminds me of why I enjoyed wrestling so much when I first got into business back in the late 80s. So I've been doing more and more of that lately, but I do that as much for fun as anything else. So I'll probably continue to do that, but I don't see myself working in a formal capacity with anybody again.
Well, thank you for your call, Harold.
Okay, thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
While we were on the subject of the New World Order, you were pitting, it seems to the fans, of course, it's WWF versus WCW. I don't know if this is a myth or urban legend. We talked about that earlier. But how close was it for Sting being the third man of the Outsiders going into the new?
It's hard to quantify how close it was. At the time when we started to really, when the story started to present itself on camera, Scott Hall showed up, and then Kevin Nash showed up, powerbombed me off the stage in Baltimore, and then we created the mystique of who's the third man going to be. Hulk Hogan was off in California doing a movie, and Hulk, people need to remember, and there's a lot of detail that they don't remember or were never aware of to begin with, but Hulk's contract at that time only called for 4 pay-per-views a year. He wasn't a regular character on our show. He was an attraction, much like Undertaker is now for WWE. And at that time, Hulk was in between pay-per-view obligations for us, and he was off doing a movie. And the nWo story was starting to, people started to see the evolution of it on television. And I went to, let me back up. We started seeing the evolution on television during that time. I had gone to Sting, asked Sting to be the third guy. Well, about that same time, I got a call from Hulk Hogan, who had been watching what was going on and was very intrigued by it. And I went out to California and met him on location of his movie set. And Hulk asked me who the third guy was going to be. And I didn't tell him. Initially, I didn't tell him. And because I didn't want it to get out. Just like keeping Lex Luger was, a secret was so important to his debut or returns. It was even more important that third man element be kept a secret. And you got to remember, back then it was really, really hard, as it is now, to keep anything a secret. So I didn't want to tell anybody, not even Hulk. And so I kind of kept it to myself, and I said, well, who do you think it should be? Who do you think it is? And he said, well, I know who it should be. It should be me. And I went, wow. But to be very honest, and Hulk is one of my dear friends. I speak to him regularly, and we've been in contact a lot over the last couple of days for obvious reasons. But, at that time, the idea of Hulk Hogan turning heel, that was a heck of a big commitment. And I wasn't sure that he was 100% committed. I was fearful that we would get right up to that moment and that he might second-guess himself, or quite honestly, his wife might, make him second-guess himself, his ex-wife, or, some of the people around him might, convince him to second-guess himself or change his mind. So I had to keep Sting kind of on deck, so to speak, while we determined whether or not Hulk was really going to make that move. And to be honest about it, Sting was ready, willing, and able to be the third man all the way up until Hulk Hogan showed up at the building that night when he turned heel in Daytona Beach.
I see. Oh.
Did Sting know before the leg drop when he seen Hulk Hogan?
Yes.
Okay.
I see that we have.
Go ahead, Brian.
I was going to say, I see that we have just about 5 more minutes left. I wanted to really quickly ask you a 3-part question, Eric, and then I wanted to get your DVD promotion over and anything else you'd like to promote. But if you could just answer this question in the shortest answer you possibly could, things would have been differently, and WCW would have put WWE out of business, and DX would have got into the arena on Nitro, and Vince McMahon would have showed up and accepted your challenge. How do you think the wrestling business would be different today?
I think it'd be more exciting. It's hard. It's hard to answer that in a short answer. It's a hypothetical. So I'll suffice it to say, I think it would have been even more exciting than it already is.
Okay, fair enough. And I know that coming up soon, June, I believe it's June the 13th, sir, you have a new DVD coming out from WWE called Eric Bischoff, Sports Entertainment's Most Controversial Figure.
Yeah, I do, and I'm very excited about it. WWE contacted me last summer and asked me if I'd be interested in doing it, and of course I said I would. It's an honor and a privilege. And they sent a crew out to my home in Wyoming and spent 3 or 4 days with me out there. And I just had a blast doing it. It's such a professional crew and a great group of guys. And I've seen the rough cut, and I'm very proud of it and grateful for it.
Okay, and you also have a book out, Controversy Creates Cash. It's been a couple years, and do you have any other anything else you'd like to advertise on the show?
No, man, I'm here to help you guys out and have a little bit of fun talking about wrestling, not to promote anything. But Controversy Creates Cash came out about a decade ago, and I think you can still find it online somehow. But No, I just came here to help you guys out and have fun with you talking about wrestling. So I've got nothing to promote.
Okay, well, we want to thank you for that. And Jason, do you have anything else you want to add? We got about 3 minutes left.
No. If I ask another question, I want to give him time to answer it. With 3 minutes left, that doesn't give him much time, but it has definitely been fun talking to you, Mr. Bischoff, about professional wrestling, business I love. And been watching my whole life. It's a great thing to meet you today, sir.
Well, I thank you guys for inviting me on your I thank you guys for inviting me on your show. I hope you have a good Friday, and happy Easter to everybody and everybody that's listening. I hope you guys have a blessed weekend, and keep up the good work. And I'm grateful for you guys for being interested in sports entertainment in our industry. Thank you very much for having me.
You too, and thank you so much for being on, sir. And we hope you have a happy Easter too.
So long, guys.
So long. God bless. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the creator of WCW Nitro, former president of WCW, and the architect of the nWo, Mr. Eric Bischoff. We hope that you enjoyed today's show. I know I did, Jason, and I'm glad that we got enough time in with Mr. Bischoff to speak with him, and I'm glad we didn't get cut short or anything, and it was such an honor to speak with him today on today's show. I think we got a lot of questions answered that we wanted to get answered.
I think we did too. Definite honor having Mr. Bischoff on, being a WCW fan. If people know me, I grew up in Atlanta, so I was at center stage, as he talked about, at a lot of those WCW Saturday nights, and to be able to talk to the guy that most of the shows, because I remember when I was 6 and 7, it was Bill Watts running it. He talked about that a lot. And it was a great show today. What do you think, Brian?
It really was. I had a blast. I thought it was a very exciting show. I want to apologize to any fans that called in and we didn't get to take their call. We were kind of cut for time because we had a lot of questions we wanted to ask Mr. Bischoff and make sure we got in there some questions. And so if we didn't take the call, we apologize. But we're glad that the fans that did call in. Until next time, follow us on the WSE Lounge on Twitter and like us on Facebook, WSE Lounge. We'll get today's episode archived so everybody can listen to it. And we will see you next time